right, welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you for attending and taking your time out of your day to attend this webinar with us today on discussing the new advanced forms flow feature in decisions, which is a new capability that allows you to control the behaviors of objects on your forms. Today's webinar will last for about 30 minutes, but will remain afterwards for any questions that you may have. I am your speaker today. My name is Robert Young, and I'll be hosting you today. And I know that we may have met some of you over previous webinars or video calls, and we appreciate your attendance today. But before we get started, I'd like to go over just a couple of features of the Zoom video tools if you're not familiar. We also welcome connections and questions on LinkedIn, so also please add us there if you will. What you can see here is a Zoom panel. If you look on your controls, you should see something similar. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we have some folks on the line here that will address your questions as they can. And for the ones that we can't get to, we'll try to deal with them at the end, or at least get back to you if we don't have the immediate answer for you. All right, to get started. So for those of you who are new to Decisions, we're a business process management software product that helps non-technical people to automate and optimize business processes without the need to code. On this slide, you can see some of our current customers are in the different sectors that we work in to just kind of give you an idea where Decisions fits. We're equal parts rules engine and workflow, so there's a lot of different problems we can solve across many industries. Just a little bit of housekeeping stuff for you as well, as far as for those of you who are new to Decisions or are familiar with Decisions and are working with us, we got some upcoming events that you might want to attend. We have a Decisions Q&A, Ask the Experts Live coming up. So please pay attention also as you look at the slide for the time zone. So these may not be in your time zone. These are listed as Eastern time, I believe, right now. So on May 3rd, we have this Decisions Q&A coming up. And then we also have on July 12th, we have an associate certification track that is coming. And then we also have a webinar on unit tests and debugging in Decisions that will be coming up on July 22nd. And then on July 27th, we have some intermediate training coming up as well. It looks like all those times are Eastern time. So just to make sure that if you are going to attend any of these, that you're aware of the time zone. All right. So today's agenda. We're going to go over and review a little bit of the legacy form flows and roles. So if you used our product before version 7, this probably will look familiar to you. So we'll just cover that real briefly just to give you an idea of to compare and contrast the differences between what was then and what you'll see today, the new version. We'll then look at the new form flow design concept. We'll take a look at that. And then we'll go into the forms and show you how the previous one worked. And then I'll go into the new one and show you how that works. And we'll build a couple things to give you an idea of what you can do with it. So in the versions previous to 7, you created your form behavior using multiple rule types. Although this worked well, it was at times confusing for the developer to create the behavior on the form that they wanted. Additionally, the developer was responsible for coordinating all the rules. So if you see over here on the left-hand side, you can see that we have some various flows. You have a data flow. We have some visibility rules here that are all set up. We then have some validation rules that are set up as well. And you're responsible as a developer for creating all these and determining which was what and when each of these should run. So it kind of made it a little bit, it was all set up through property sheets and stuff, and sometimes it could be a little confusing. In order to access data on the form, it required you to take multiple steps to make the form data available. You not only had to update the inputs, but you also had to edit each one to define the data. Unfortunately, I guess you could say unfortunately, at least compared to how we do it on the new version, it was all done via a property sheet without the use of a visual designer. But for backwards compatibility, we have preserved this functionality in version 7. So you'll see on the property sheet, you'll see under this legacy node, you'll see these capabilities still there. So if you've already built forms that have validation and display rules and that sort of thing, they will still work in version 7. They're just kind of located in a slightly different place. On the new version, we give you something called an active form flow. This gives you a lot more control over the behavior of your form. So instead of multiple control flow types, you now have one flow type to set up on your form to control its behavior. To make the development process easier, we've added a new section in the Designer called Form Rules. So when we go into the Visual Designer, you'll see how that works. You build your form rules and behaviors just as you do a workflow. Using the new form rule types, which you can see over here on the left-hand side of the slide here. You can control the UI as before, but now you have more control over the form. You're able to make more complex rules in a Visual Designer. So if you look here, it's similar to how you build a normal workflow. You use a visual flow designer to build the controls. You use your familiar object to drag and drop. So as you can see here on this particular slide, we have some decision points that are made. And a lot of these objects may look very familiar to you if you've done any development building workflows within decisions. So things like doing calculations and updating fields and that sort of thing. So it becomes very similar and a lot more comfortable to build your form flows because they're, again, something you've already experienced within the workflow designers. In addition, all your form data is accessible via the flow data dialog. So where before you had to go out into the property sheet and start updating inputs and tell it where the data was coming from and that sort of thing. For those of you who've built workflows in decisions, you can go into the flow data dialog and you can access your data there. So the same thing here, everything that's in the form is now available directly to you within the dialog. So without much more time, let's go ahead and get into the demonstration, I should say. So give me just a second here, and I will adjust things here and get into the presentation, or actually the demonstration, I should say. All right. So this is version 7 of Decisions for those of you who are not familiar. And what I have here is what I'm calling a legacy form. So I've duplicated this form, and we'll see how this behaves differently from when you use the legacy rule types as opposed to the new rule types. The behavior itself won't really be any different, but it's just how you get there, how you build the components. So what we have here is a form with a couple of number of fields on it. The idea this is like a time off request form, and we only want certain fields available when certain actions have been taken on the form. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see the legacy node that I was mentioning. It's here underneath where you have your form rules. So we have some data flow here for calculating our days requested. So we can take a look at that. Again, you can see the property sheet that we have to complete to make it work. We can edit the flow. So we have this concept here still, but this is what we've expanded upon within version 7. If you take a look at your show dates and stuff, it's just, again, it's just a rule that's been created. So in this particular rule, it's just a condition to check to see if the address input is empty or not. And then based upon that, we can tell it when to run, what the inputs are and that sort of thing. So we have all these different rules and controls over here just to make this form behave. So if we go ahead and test this, I'll just run it through the debugger. I'll just put 8 days as our days available, and we'll debug this. You can see that we have some, enter a name. I guess I ought to make it more decisions.com. And as I type in these fields, we got other events happening. So just what you would expect. So I can work my days off, my return date, I'm getting a warning because it needs to be after my start date. So I'll do the 30th. And then I get a calculation that's done that my days requested, days available, and days remaining. And it shows my submit button at that point as well. So just exactly what you would expect from building the behaviors within the designer itself. Now, if we go look at what we can do in version 7, very similar, I have the same exact form, but I have some different, the way I build this, you'll see down here, I have nothing in my legacy flows. I'm doing it just through a couple of form rules. I actually could accomplish this all through one rule, but I decided to break it out just so you can see how we might build something and make some changes and edits to this. So if I test this the first time, the way I've set it up, and again, we'll put in 8 for our days available. and we'll go ahead and debug this. You can see I have my start date, my return date are already visible. And I really don't want that. What I prefer is, it to happen after I enter my email address information and then show the start date and return date. So let's go ahead and close this, and we'll stop the debugging, and we'll come back and we'll make a change here so we can show how that works. So if I go into my active form flows, I have one called display date fields. So I'll just go ahead and edit this flow. And as you can see, I have nothing here right now because I've just left it blank for the moment. But if we come over to the left-hand side, we now have a new component over here called form rules. And within form rules, I have all the elements that I might use that before were kind of properties, if you will, within the old legacy type of dialogue, that now are just drag and drop components that I can place in a flow. And it makes a lot more sense when you start working this way. When I first started working with it, it was a little different at first, but now that I've worked with it, it's really much more comfortable and it makes a lot more sense when you work with, especially something's more complex, which I'll show you in just a moment. So in this case, let's show multiple fields. So we'll set up our multiple field control, and we'll just say build array, and then we'll add some fields to this. So the first one, I'll go to form data. We know we want our date fields. Now, as I mentioned earlier, everything is now available through this dialog box. So I don't have to go figure out how do I get the inputs or the outputs or the data. Everything is now available to me here. So here's my start label. So I'll make that visible. Oops, it's already there. Sorry, grab that. I'll add another one. And we'll go to our form data and we'll add our start date. We have that guy. And then we'll add another one. Matter of fact, we need two more actually. So we'll pick this one and we'll choose our return date label. And then we'll add data, our return date field. So we'll enable all that. So that's our form control right there. All right, so we have all that set up now, and we'll just go ahead and save this. Close. Now I've already set up in here how what's gonna trigger this particular flow. So just similar to what we had in the previous version, you can see all the controls that are available on your form, and here I have the triggers that will cause that particular flow to work. So in this case, on my email address box, if I exit it or change the values in it, it should enable my my date fields. So if we go back to our debug, and we press 8 for our value. Whoops, I must have not saved it. Let me try to go back and save that. Make sure I did save the values in here. Edit my rule flow. Yes, I did. All right, save. All right, so we'll come back here again and try to debug this and see how it works for us. Well, I've totally messed something up somehow. I'm not sure what I've done, but as you can see, this is a demo. So I'll just put my name in here. Let's see, email at mail.com. Oops. Mail.com. We'll go ahead and put in our start date for the 28th and our return date, say, of the 30th. So as we do that, we can see we get our same calculations just like we did in our legacy form. And our submit button now has also appeared as well. Now, one change I would like to make. So for example, if I go back here and let's say, so my start date will still be the 28th. Let's say my return date is the 30th. Now I've requested way more days than I have days available. So now I've got an error that says I've more days than I have available, but my submit button is still available. So maybe what I'd like to do is change and hide that submit button. So what we could do at this point is we can go back into, I'm going to just close this in case I was getting things confusing. We'll go back and edit our form, go to our properties for it. And then we'll come down here to our validation rule here. We'll edit the rule flow. And now you can see in this particular scenario here, which is very different than from what you had in the previous versions of decisions, is I actually have a full flow that I can make conditional checks on. So is my return date after the start date? If it's not, I put a warning here. And then I just end the flow at that point. If it's true, I can then clear all the validation. So if I had any errors on the screen, I can go ahead and get those out of the way. But then I can calculate my days requested, update that field, calculate the days remaining, update the days remaining field. Now, what's interesting here too, as I mentioned earlier, all your data is available directly now within the flow. So even when I go to output data, I just click on the change value and pick that particular field. So in this case, I just go straight to that field and go to this dialog box to pick that value. Now, in our case where I said that even though we went back and requested more days than were available, one thing that didn't happen was our submit button was still there. So you can see here, if everything was true and our days requested were less than the days available, we would show the submit button to actually submit the form. Now, when I went back and made the days requested more than the days available, we followed this false path and added the warning. The problem is our submit button was still available. So technically the person could still submit the form. So let's go ahead and add a new form control here, or form rule. And what we want to do is hide the control. So what we'll do is grab our hide control button, or element I should say, we'll drag it right here. And we'll tell it which control that we would like to hide. In this case, it'd be the submit button. So I'll select OK. It should be visible or not. Yep, let me remove that. Just say done. All right. That should take care of that. As we can see over here, this is the one that's enabled it. So we'll save that. Close out of here. Click OK. Save our form again. Close out of here. And we'll go ahead and debug this. And we'll click on Start Debugging. So again, now I have my name input, my email at mail.com. We can input our start and end dates. And again, I'm not sure what I messed up here, but I certainly did mess something up. So there's our values. Now, if I go and change this to the 30th, you can see our submit button has now been removed. So I'm able to now, within a flow, make all my decisions and have it affect how I want my form to work, instead of trying to go into property sheets and figure out, did I select the right property? Did I not select the right property? Which ones did I select? And I just realized too, what I messed up here on the start and return dates. Let me go fix that for you right quick, because it is kind of important that you see how this part works. One thing I didn't do was I forgot to change these to not being initially visible. So I don't want them initially visible. So I'll turn these off. So I'll change the behavior to not being initially visible for each of these fields. On the behavior. There we go. And if we save this, and we'll close our form and then debug it again. I'll use 8 again for my days available. Start debugging. Now we can see this is correct. So I'll put in a name here, and I'll put in an email. And as you can see, as I started typing in, it put those values, or excuse me, it enabled those fields now. So I needed to change it so they weren't initially visible. So if we go then through this form completely again, I'll choose my start date as being the 28th. If I make my return date too early, I'll get an error there. Again, no submit button. If I go back and make my return date the 30th, it'll calculate everything out and show me that, yes, you have time available and you can submit this form. Or if I go and just decide I want a whole lot of time, again, my date requested is more than I have for days available, and therefore my submit button at this point has been disabled. So that, in a nutshell, is how the new active forms controls work in version 7 of decisions on all of your new forms. And as I mentioned before, too, just to give you one last look here, this is where the new controls are, and this is where your legacy controls will be. So if we go back and look at the previous form, you'll see here in the legacy section, all these would come across from version 6. If you are more comfortable building this way, you still can build this way. So if the question that you might have is, can I still do it this way? The answer is yes. However, for future proofing yourself and moving forward, we recommend that any new forms you create, use the form rules, because this will be, this will be where things are headed in the future. How long the legacy ones will still be there, I don't know, but I do know that we do a pretty good job of keeping backward compatibility for a while. But we highly recommend play with the new form rules, see how you like them, get used to them, and hopefully they'll be what you expect them to be. So with that, let me see if there's any questions at this point. So we do have one question here. Let's see if it's been answered. In the active form flow, are you restricted to only the steps available in the form rules section? No, you're not. So as you can see, let me go back to the, close this and go back to the form control, edit the flow. Everything else is still available here. So I still have all my normal actions like sending email and that sort of thing. And I also have access to all of my other controls down here. So the form rules are just for the rules that would apply to the form itself. But as you can see also in here, in this example, I have used things for doing calculations, for figuring out the days that were available and to be able to show those calculations. And then also I've got some rules here to determine, is my dates requested less than the days available? Is my return date after the start date? So you could add any other, rule sets or whatever else you need to in here to make this flow work and make the form, interactive in the way that you expect it to work for your end user. All right, let's see if there's any other questions that have come up. When legacy rules section retires, will we need to rebuild rules in the new area for older forms? It's a good question. I can't answer that right now because I'm not sure what we're going to do for the future. I would just suggest that that as we move forward, that you start using the new capability. And I believe maybe somebody took that from me here to see if they answered it. That you can, should use a new capability. I don't know if there'll be a conversion tool, but if you do have any other questions on that, feel free to contact our support team and we can work through a little bit better and get you hopefully a more solid answer for you. I just don't know what's going to happen in the future with that. It'd be really nice if there was a conversion tool. Don't know if we'll have one yet or not. All right. If there are any other questions, we know this is a very short webinar for today. We appreciate your time. We'll hang on for a few more minutes if anybody else has questions. And we appreciate everybody coming today. Thank you very much.